I mean, of all the things that we've talking about, I mean, that's probably the one you can talk about the most.
Yeah, and we're recording.
Oh, well, that's good to know already. I'm glad you told me we're pushing the button. Awesome.
Hi, I'm Stephen Norton.
And I'm Nicholas Anderson. And as always, I'm going to start the podcast by giving you a nice little PSA. So, just to tell you up front, me and Steve do not presume to be experts in anything whatsoever. This is a podcast by autistic people, because that's what we are, for autistic people. And we're just going to kind of give our views about different subjects and talk about different topics. And we're going to either talk about how we feel about it or how it affects us in that way, or just in general, we're going to chat with each other. You may hear things that you agree with, you may hear things that you don't agree with. If you do agree with us, leave a comment. If you don't agree with us, leave a comment. If there's a topic you'd like to talk about in a different episode, please let us know. Oh, and we may use some foul language, so enjoy that.
Yes, I enjoy the foul language. I love to talk about birds. All right, today we're going to talk about politics. We're getting a little political in here. So before we started recording, Nick was outside having a smoke, and I was complaining about the one thing that really grinds my gears is the tribalism. So people on the spectrum, we often get accused of having like black or white thinking, of thinking in extremes, you know, one or the other, all or nothing, I think Nick likes to call it, or whatever the proper term is.
All or nothing thinking.
But the point is, it's funny to me to see neurotypical people, normies, go down that same rabbit hole, that same path when it comes to politics, because people tend to get very tribal. And the way, I mean, I guess politics has always been divisive and tribal. But
Steve, what is tribal?
It means, well, tribalism refers to our instincts to stick to our own kind when it comes to like human nature, and also other primates. Like primates will typically stick with their tribe, right? And human beings, we typically stick with what we know and the people around us. So if you come from a certain community, let's say we lived 400 or 500 years ago and you lived in a town, you stuck to the people in the town, the people you knew, and anybody who came in who was an outsider was a danger or a threat.
So how does that relate to politics? Because
people get tribal when it comes to their political camp. So if I'm a Democrat or I'm a Republican, especially people who are really into politics, they treat it like it's their team or their tribe, and they get brain rot, like where they only accept things that are within a certain purview. It's like you're looking at the world through these rose-tinted glasses, and you can only see things through the lens of your tribe. Rather than looking at things objectively, you can only see things through the lens of, I'm a Republican or I'm a Democrat, so I have to agree, or I have to see the world this way. And when things come along, let's say if you're a Democrat and somebody who's a Republican says something that is objectively true, but because it's a Republican saying it, you can't accept it as truth because your fucking brain rots.
So we get stuck in our ideologies.
Yeah, you get fixated on the ideology instead of
the issue itself.
Right, because people on the left and right can both make good points about things, or people in the middle can make good points about things. And just because you agree with a certain political ideology doesn't mean that everything that somebody says on your team is always correct and everybody on the other team is always incorrect. And more specifically, what I was complaining about outside is how the all or nothing thing is how we demonize those who are on the other side.
Yes.
We disagree with us on a particular topic, right, instead of trying to understand why people feel the way they do. And what I hear people say when they combat that, when they come at it, if I try to explain, well, I want to understand why somebody feels a certain way or why somebody has a certain opinion, rather than just saying, your opinion sucks and you're evil.
Yeah.
They'll say to me, well, it doesn't matter. We don't need to try to understand how they feel or why they think. It's not my job and not my responsibility to teach someone else. They're just a shitty person. And whatever they're doing, their worldview is destroying the world or hurting people.
they're wrong because they are them. That kind of idea.
Yeah, but also it's not my job to teach them.
Right.
We just need to say they're bad and shun them, ostracize them, because it's not worth our time to try to understand them and try to correct their opinion or their behavior. We should just give up on them and put them in the corner and say, these are terrible people who are ruining society, and let's not deal with them. And you see it on both sides when it comes to the left and the right.
Oh, absolutely.
And it drives me nuts that, because I'll see people who are really smart, very intelligent, but because they're obsessed with whatever political ideology it is, that whatever base they belong to, if somebody comes along and says something and their team doesn't like this person, they'll be like, well, that's bullshit. And they'll defend bad ideas.
Do you think some of that has to do with like mob mentality about it? Like they identify to a certain political party, and so it's almost like a mob mentality about it that they kind of latch onto, like that community idea latch onto?
Well, yeah, that's why I say tribal, because it's like,
So
it's a tribe,
kind of thing.
and it's exacerbated
Yes.
because of the world we live in right now with technology.
Right.
You have, are you familiar with the term echo chambers?
Yes.
So you have these echo chambers that exist online. And if you know anything about social media, you know that social media tends to promote content that it thinks you'll like. So if you start watching a bunch of videos by Democrats and you like all these videos and you spend all your time watching videos that people on the left like,
Right.
you're only going to see left-wing content, and you'll keep seeing more and more left-wing content.
Right. Because of those algorithms.
So you never hear any of the valid or any arguments on the other side, whether valid or invalid, but you don't, and it's also ineffectual. Like if you're somebody who's into politics and you want to ever debate somebody or you want to try to change somebody's mind, you can't do it unless you understand their argument and their point of view.
Opposed to just thinking you know it from the surface.
Right. So like one thing, I went through kind of a long political journey in my life where, I was very hardcore left-wing growing up. Then I went through like a opposite, like very conservative phase. And then I kind of I'm at now where I'm more moderate, very libertarian, but like super liberal when it comes to like my social values. Like I don't care what anybody wants to do. I'm all for like decriminalizing drugs, and like I don't think that people who do drugs are criminals. They should be put in jail. I don't think that prostitution should be illegal. I don't, gay people should be able to get married. I don't care. Like I don't want. That's very libertarian. Like my point of view is like the government, and me being a voting person who affects what the government does, with my vote. I don't want to tell other people what they can and can't do with their personal lives.
Relatively speaking.
Yeah, like I don't want to tell people like the whole gay marriage thing, for instance. Like it's not my business if two gay people want to get married. What the fuck? Like that's not the government's job, in my opinion, to tell people who they can and can't marry. I know like there's certain reasons why it's illegal to like marry your sister or something like that. Like there's laws against incest and stuff like that. But I'm just saying, like in general, I don't think the government should be telling people who they can and can't marry.
Right.
Or telling people like if I decide I want to smoke weed, that's nobody's business but myself. I know you have different opinions when it comes to some of the drug stuff because of what you do and your background. But
because for majority of what you're talking about, not talking about gay marriage, but like some of the other stuff you talked about, like prostitution and drugs, I believe there needs to be some level of regulation and some level of law about it. I don't believe it needs to be as restrictive as it.
I think the arguments exist in the gray area. When you get into the weeds, it's like, well, how much of this is permissible?
Yeah.
And just because drugs are decriminalized doesn't mean that we still don't do something as a society to try to protect people from addiction. It just means that I don't think that somebody who does drugs is a criminal on a moral level. Like, because we base our laws on morality, right? Even though, like people have a problem with people like using the Bible as a source of morality to make law and all that stuff. To me, it's whatever. But because all laws that we create are based on some sort of moral belief. Like we believe morally that killing is wrong, therefore we make a law against killing. Right. There's a moral basis for a lot of these laws, right? Yeah. So me, I'm saying I don't think on a moral level somebody doing drugs they're not a criminal.
Well, I agree with you because we could get them more help, and as a society, we could do more to help people who have addiction issues if we weren't criminalizing them first.
Right. I think it would be much more effective to spend if we're going to spend. I don't have the figures on hand, but I know we spent billions of dollars on the war on drugs, and a lot of that money that the federal government was spending to combat drugs and still spends to combat like drugs. Some of that, and in local law enforcement, even on the local and state level, some of that money could be spent on trying to rehabilitate people or to help people instead of
treatment, opposed to incarcerate them.
Yeah, and people will say, well, a lot of people who aren't in jail for drugs aren't there just because of drugs. They pleaded down. So what they'll say is like, oh, somebody got arrested for something else.
Yeah.
And then they got them on the drugs because possession or something because they didn't have enough to make something else stick.
So I actually had this conversation with somebody else, and they were like, well, it's not because that they're an addict or have a substance use issue. It's because they broke other laws. Yeah, but the substance use actually plays into that. Like, somebody broke into your house to steal stuff so they could pawn it so they could get money for their addiction. Like, the addiction is part of that thinking. It's part of that action. And so if we just lock people up for essentially a symptom to it, opposed to getting them treatment for the actual issue, we're spending a hell of a lot of money in like a misappropriation direction, but we have tendency of doing that. I mean, a lot of political stuff and a lot of things that like Congress does has tendency to be that way. They're trying to fix a symptom of another issue, and they're not really addressing the issue itself.
I agree with you. I would say we kind of went off on a tangent, which is my fault because I was talking a lot, but
About addiction.
Right. I went off because originally before I got into this whole thing, I was talking about echo chambers. But my point was with the echo chamber thing is that,
Steve, for anybody who doesn't know what it is, please explain what an echo chamber is.
So online echo chambers exist. Echo chambers exist in all types of environments.
Yes.
But because of the way technology works, as I mentioned earlier, and people are like, social media is a drop in the bucket as far as human history. Like, we've never had these technologies before. And we don't know long term what the effects are going to be on people psychologically. Like, there's studies being done about the effects it has and some of the potential side effects it has. We know for a fact, and I'm sure you read stuff about this, like the negative impact on kids.
Yeah.
Some of the there's a link
with issues.
Yeah, there's a link between like social media and depression, anxiety, and other like mental issues because of the way these technologies work. There's
discussions about social media being an addiction in itself.
The reason you get so many notifications for a lot of these applications is because it triggers a dopamine response.
Yes.
And it's addictive. Right. Like other things like gambling and other things are addictive. So social media is designed to be addictive on purpose.
Right.
And part of it is they want you to get hooked into things, hooked into content. So they have algorithms that push content that is similar to other things you like. So people will fall into these rabbit holes where if I start watching a bunch of, let's say, extreme right-wing content,
yes,
I'll keep getting more extreme right-wing content and I won't hear anything that challenges my beliefs. So an echo chamber is where you're stuck in an environment where you're only hearing things that you already agree with and you don't hear anything that is contrary. There's nothing challenging those beliefs. And people fall into, and actually somebody told me this the other day, I don't know if this is true, but they were saying that people on the spectrum have a higher tendency to fall into some of these rabbit holes. For instance, when it came to like the alt-right, apparently there were a lot of people online in the alt-right community who were autistic, and they kind of fell into this trap of started watching this extreme right-wing content and they get sucked into it.
Right. Well, I think it happens the same on both sides. And actually, you just because words is half my thing.
I was just using right wings.
Yeah, but isn't it interesting? We call it the alt-right, but far left. We don't call it the alt-right or alt-left.
Well, alt-right was actually a term that was invented, I believe, by Richard Spencer.
I just think it's interesting that we have two different names to describe these.
Oh, I know, but that term was created specifically by a person who was on the far right. So he created the term.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh. Which is funny. Label yourself, guy.
I didn't know this. I recently saw a video of a it was it's not really a podcast, it's kind of a podcast, but I saw a podcast the other day, and I didn't know. I watched this guy Destiny, he's a streamer and he does political streams, and
He did the blue-haired guy who plays video games.
yeah. Well, he only dyed his hair because he lost a bet. But anyway,
All right, fine.
yeah. Anyway,
Who plays video games while having social issues?
yeah, and he does political debates and stuff like that. I'm pretty sure he's mentioned that he's autistic a few times on some of our streams. But anyway, he was on a panel debating, not a panel, but he was on a podcast debating with Richard Spencer the other day, and I hadn't heard anything from Richard Spencer in like God knows how long. He was this, you know who he is, right?
No.
He's a white nationalist, or he was a white nationalist. He was the founder of the alt-right.
Oh.
Yeah, he was on a show the other day debating with Destiny, and it was strange because Richard Spencer is not even the same person anymore. He's all of a sudden like a more lefty now. He's like a big Biden supporter and all this stuff. It's just really strange.
If you think about it, though, all the people we originally associated with alt-right seem far more moderate now compared to some of the other people that have come out.
Yeah.
Well, you know what I mean? Like, I could name some of the Congress people that I would say are
Probably gonna
they're alt-right than what original alt-right was.
get in trouble for bringing up Richard Spencer or get canceled or something.
I don't know.
But because everybody, you know, was rightly villainized because of some of the shit he was saying before. He was associated with other alt-right groups, and he was, you know, he didn't outright say anything. Like, a lot of it was dog whistling and codes. Like, you know, you don't say things directly, but you hint at, like, he was hinting at white nationalist type of views. Like, I think he talked about it because it's been a long time since I watched any of his clips, but he used to talk about things in the context of like having a Christian nation, like that. Yeah. He wanted to
use Christianity as eyes for their.
He was talking about like having America be like a religious, I don't know, like
That's like a theocracy?
kind of, yeah, like a Christian theocracy. Yeah.
No, I'm not bashing Christianity. I think theocracy.
He also said things that were leaning in the direction of like racial superiority, stuff like that. Like he would say things about like, well, I don't think that white people are better, but we just have certain things that we're more geared towards, and like
He said that?
yeah, stuff like that. It would say that certain races are better at certain things than other races, that type of stuff. And so that's why he was very controversial, and he was one of the founders of that. But now I heard him the other day, and I was like, is this the same guy?
Well, I mean, people can change their views over time. Maybe
maybe
he got, and excuse the expression, but maybe he got a little bit more woke.
He was talking about like, oh, I look back at how I was back in 2016. He doesn't like Trump anymore, and saying that he cringes about all the stuff he used to say. And I'm like, is this really the same guy? I mean, yeah, people can change. I'm like, I don't know if he was being honest or if this was like, because this is the only thing I've seen of him recently. The last time I saw him was when he was all like white nationalist or Hitler Youth.
Maybe he was pandering to try to
some status. I don't know. He used to. In fact, when people used to make fun of my haircut, they used to say that I had a Richard Spencer haircut. It looked like a fucking Hitler Youth because I have kind of like short on the side, longer at the top. Yeah, that's what they used to compare me to.
Sorry, because I made that joke on stage about you.
Yeah, and then people will ask me, well, how do you know who that guy is? I'm like, because I'm fucking autistic. I read shit. Like when I get fascinated by something, like politically, like the alt-right, I'm like, who the fuck is this guy? Who the fuck is the alt-right? Who is Richard Spencer? Who is this guy?
I do want to say this, though, because you said, go down this rabbit hole. You do have tendency to listen to people who are on the right. You do have tendency to listen more heavy Republican.
Because their point of views are interesting to me. Because I don't always agree with everything they say, but I want to understand some of it better, especially like people who are like religious conservatives.
Right.
Like I want to know what their justifications are. Like you have this viewpoint. What's your justification for it?
You call them religious.
Some of them are.
Justification.
Yeah, some of it. But they also try to find, so that the ones who are clever, like Ben Shapiro, well,
you just listen to him a lot, don't you?
He's a, well,
yes, just say yes.
Sometimes, but so I listen to him sometimes, but not for like, people will say, oh, you like Ben Shapiro? I'm like, just because I listen to him doesn't mean I like him.
That's true too.
because I also listen to Destiny, and I agree with a lot of what he says, but I don't agree with everything he says. I listen to, I used to watch the Young Turks, but I can't stand them anymore. The Young Turks is like a far left.
Yeah.
Meaning,
I watched a little bit of their stuff.
because they're like to me they're like Tucker Carlson, but like the left. Yeah, like they say all this ridiculous, crazy shit.
I mean, unfortunately, that's kind of where our society has come, that if you're not saying ridiculous in left or right, then nobody's listening. So you have to say outlandish stuff on either side.
My point about Ben Shapiro was that he'll say things, but he tries not to use religion as a justification for his opinion. So he comes up with a secular reason for it. And this is what he'll say when he goes on debates. He's like, well, I don't argue religion, because if you don't believe my religion, it doesn't matter.
Right. And I actually completely agree with that. So I don't disagree with Ben Shapiro on with what he says. I disagree with his opinions,
right,
and stances on things, but his logic is very sound in a lot.
Because he'll take something that's factual,
right,
and tell you what actually happened,
right.
But then when he adds his opinion, sometimes his opinions are like, all right, I don't know,
you're going far now.
I don't think I necessarily agree with that. But that's my problem with all those people. Like,
right,
Tucker Carlson will say something that sounds reasonable, and then he'll go and like add the spin and the propaganda.
I'm sorry, I gotta say it. I've never once heard Tucker Carlson say, and I've never listened to a lot of it, never once heard him say anything reasonable.
To be fair, I haven't watched a lot of his stuff. I've seen clips of him. I haven't watched cable news in probably like 10 or 15 years.
Yeah.
So the only time I ever see cable news, like anything from Fox or CNN, is like when I see something on YouTube or clips or like segments from one of their shows. But like he'll say, what I meant is what I'm saying. Like when he says something, he'll say something factual, but then when he adds the spin and the propaganda to it,
yeah.
But a lot of those media companies do that.
Oh, of course, everybody got a spin, man.
Yeah.
I had an argument with an old friend of mine who said in the early 1900s, media was better because it was more honest and truthful. And I said, no, man, it's always had a spin. Because when humans are involved, there is a spin.
Yeah.
When humans get involved with something, they're going to try to influence something to whatever point of view they have. I don't think there's ever been, and this is my opinion, I don't believe there's ever been truly an honest news person or honest news broadcast.
Shoots for one. I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying that Tucker Carlson sounds reasonable sometimes, because somebody's going, he said Tucker Carlson. I'm like, no, that's not what I'm saying, but okay, whatever. Take me out of context.
Yeah.
I was saying that, complaining about the spin.
Yeah.
Two, the whole point of what I was talking about before we get into this is what aggravates me about all this is the hyper-partisan, the tribalism, the people going into these camps where they have the all or nothing, black or white thinking, where it's this way or not. That is what drives me nuts. Is the, if I try to understand people with all different kinds of opinions, even if I don't agree with it, like whether you're any controversial political topic, and I'm like, okay, why does somebody think this way, or why does somebody feel that way? I don't instantly demonize the other person.
Right.
And that's what drives me nuts, is the demonization of anybody who disagrees with you and instantly writing somebody off, and the othering, which I guess maybe as somebody who is one of us, is something I'm sympathetic towards, is the othering part of it. Like, I don't like that othering of people just because I disagree with you. And the funny thing is, if you actually have a conversation with somebody, if you're somebody on the left or somebody on the right, and you actually talk to somebody who is on the complete opposite side of the spectrum as you, 90% of the time you'll agree on like 75. Yeah. You'll agree with like 75% of the shit. Like, you'll agree on like most of it. 50 to 75% you guys will agree politically. Most people do actually agree with each other when it comes to politics. It's only a small number of subjects where people actually disagree. It's like most of us agree on like some of the things. Like, most people agree with basic principles like free speech and stuff like that. It's just there's a small subset of topics that everybody fights about. Well, in the social media and everything else exacerbates it, what I was saying, because of the echo chambers. People only hearing things they agree with, they're never challenged. And when they are challenged, they don't know how to deal with it besides make fun of, demean, or demonize the other side, because they're they're not equipped to deal with somebody who disagrees with them because all they're ever hearing is people who agree with them.
I got you. Well, I was gonna say something. I had something, but I fucking lost it.
People are going to think I'm a Nazi after this.
No, they're not gonna think I'm a Nazi.
Like he said.
What I was gonna say was, like, when it comes to like big concepts like treating people fairly, everybody agrees to treat people fairly. Everybody agrees everybody has a right to live. Everybody agrees that like we shouldn't be overly taxed. But it's how we apply some of that stuff and execute some of that stuff is where the difference in the ideologies come in.
Yeah.
Like, if you ask just a single human being, do you believe all people should be treated fairly? Everybody's going to say yes. But when you start asking questions about, oh, for this group, how should you do this? How should we do that? What should we do with this group? What should we do for that group? Then people start to get kind of particular.
How about political theater? Like the stuff going on with a lot of the transgender legislation. To me, it's kabuki. It's political theater. They're doing these things.
Yeah, help me understand, because you just said kabuki.
So it's performative.
No.
So I'm saying they're doing it to rally conservatives behind a cause. Yes, but it's smoke and mirrors because the thing they're complaining about is not even really a problem.
Right.
Like, there's not a bunch of kids out there getting transgender surgeries or whatever. And even if...
Well, there is a lot. It's just not as many as they're making out to be, and it's definitely not as destructive as they're making.
No, there are almost zero kids being surgically altered.
Oh, that's what you meant literally.
I'm talking about like
transition.
Yeah, they're talking about kids being surgically transitioned. That's not something that's actually happening, but they're complaining about things like this, or like the drag stuff, the drag time.
Yeah,
They're focusing on all these issues that don't matter. It's all to drive, like, it's all emotional based. It's not based in actual fact of like kids being hurt or anything bad going on with kids. It's all to drive people into a fervor over their emotions.
I do want to make sure that we're clarifying. Steve is not saying that the laws prohibiting drag doesn't matter and it doesn't affect anybody. What he is saying, or at least it sounds like you're saying, is they're making a much bigger deal about the drag story time than it really is.
Yeah, and the trans issues.
Yes.
Both of them saying they're making a big deal out of it.
Yeah.
To try to, it's a political motivator.
Right. We are trying in support of both those groups of people.
Yeah. What I'm saying is they're true. No, I guess I thought that was clear based on what I'm saying, but I'm saying that they're making a big deal out of it on purpose to try to it's a rallying cry for their people.
Oh, definitely for the drag story time. Like, there is no fun in the world with a person telling a fucking story, regardless of how they're dressed, right?
Yeah.
Like, they make the big deal of that, but they also tried to make a big deal about anything that steps outside of, atomic family kind of idea.
Yeah.
Right? Like, if you're not a guy wearing a pair of pants and a dress shirt, like that kind of step outside thing, they made a big deal about anybody who steps outside of that. Like the Tennessee law, it specifically says, I think it's something like cabaret, like it bans cabaret performances in public.
Yeah.
And just the writing of the kind of way, like, it's not stopping people from performing in bars. It's not stopping people from performing drag at private businesses, but it's stopping anybody in drag from going anywhere like a pride event in a park.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's basically saying, no, you can still do your thing, but do it real privately so the rest of us can't see you.
So if we're going to make fun of the right, and we should, because the right does a lot of stupid credit, we should also make fun of the left. And I'll say, like, some of the things that they talk about that's performative, that they don't actually do anything about.
Yes.
Gun legislation.
Oh, that's my favorite. Oh my God.
They talk about gun reform all the time, but nobody ever actually does anything.
No, they don't even put forth gun legislation that actually makes sense for it.
Or
they put a bill out there that they know full well is going to get turned down. They know full well it's going to get turned down. They don't actually try to do anything about it.
The other one I just came to mind because I didn't think of this ahead of time. I'm just thinking about it. Another one is, like, this was a touchy subject recently, but the whole Roe v. Wade thing, right?
Right.
So
how the Supreme Court was ruling on it, not made a different law.
But like
That the Supreme Court can't change.
but Congress has the ability and has had the ability for many years to codify
Yes, they have.
that into law.
Right.
They just chose to never make that an issue.
Right. In fact, they had 40 years, was it? Never did it.
So it's like one of those things where people like to talk and they'll rally people to their side on a cause based on like, oh, well, we care about women's rights. Or if you're conservative, it's like, oh, well, they're trying to train the kids and they're trying to sexualize kids with drag queens or whatever. But they don't.
Pretty unfair.
But they don't. Well, I guess the Republicans are actually trying to do something about it with whatever the laws.
Well,
but
it's yes and no, because yes, they are trying to do something publicly that is anti-drag, anti-trans on the surface, but
gotta be careful, Nick.
Yeah.
Careful what you're saying.
That thing in Tennessee, if you read the wording to it, like, it's not stopping anything other than the story time thing, or drag queens or drag kings for that matter.
But to me, that's
public spaces. And yes, it is a restriction and a limitation on it, and I don't agree with them doing that.
It's authoritarian.
But it's more like, it's interesting to me because they could have actually made a law that said you cannot do drag. Like, they could have actually...
That would probably... Yeah, but if they did that, that would probably end up being that would be a constitutional rights violation.
Help me understand that then.
So
how is that a constitutional...
I'm pretty sure even if you... Well, that's the thing, could be argued. Because if you were to try to pass a law, somebody could challenge it in a state court, and eventually it could get to the federal courts. It could challenge it that it's unconstitutional. It could eventually go it could eventually go up to
can't they still do that?
Supreme Court. Yeah, so they could pass the law.
Right. But that's how
which is actually what happened with the Roe v. Wade thing.
Yes.
They passed the law in whatever state it was, I can't remember right now. Southern state.
Yeah.
That
Georgia
was in violation of Roe v. Wade because they passed a restriction that was on the cusp of what was acceptable.
Yes.
And they did that knowing that there was a good chance it was going to be challenged, and it was brought to the Supreme Court. But you could do the same thing with something like that, because if you were to say, like, if you were to try to ban drag or something like that,
like,
first of all, I wouldn't agree with anything like that, because it's too authoritarian. So in principle, that's where I am. I try not to be an ideologue.
Yes.
I have a phrase that I say. I think ideologues are idiots. Like, you're letting your ideology consume you to the point where you're unable to think in any way outside of your own ideology. But ideologically, I lean libertarian. And to me, like, passing laws like that is too authoritarian. Even if your intention is, well, we want to protect kids, and there's an argument, well, you're not really actually protecting kids. But even still, on principle, it's too authoritarian. You're trying to tell people what they can and can't wear. That's none of your business.
Well,
if I'm a parent and I want to bring my kid to a drag, then that's none of your business. I'm a parent.
It's up to you
who made the decision to do that. Right. That's none of your fucking business.
Right. And if you don't like drag story time, don't bring the kids to the library that day.
Right. So on principle, I'd be against it, but I'm saying that it'd be a First Amendment violation of the drag queen.
But that's actually the benefit to them putting these laws into place, because somebody now has the ability to challenge that law all the way up to the Supreme Court. And now the Supreme Court has to view it in the framework of what they're allowed to do, which is compare it to constitutional.
You're not allowed to say these things.
Well, but it's a good thing that we have this stuff pop up, because it allows us to challenge.
No, I know what you're saying. It's just people, if anybody's listening, people might not. They don't care about the end result.
No, they don't care about the process either.
They care about, because somebody did something that could potentially hurt somebody else.
Right.
And so, like, the problem, like, when I've gotten criticism about talking about these things in the past, people have criticized people like us talking about these sorts of things, because they're saying, well, it's safe for you to talk about it and talk this way because you're not affected by it. And also, there's actual harm being done. Like, if conservatives in these states pass certain laws that are affecting these communities, like passing anti-trans legislation, the suicide rate in the trans community is already very high, and they're saying, like,
we're talking about drag.
I know, but I'm saying I'm using it as a
staging on it. So, because I wanted to make a point of like that law in Tennessee, because it got passed, because it got enacted, we can now challenge that.
I know what you're saying. I'm just telling you what people know.
Rule and protect the right to do drag.
I know. I'm telling you though.
To do any kind of performance art and covered under the First Amendment. Prior to that, though, it's not protected. People assume it's protected under freedom of speech, but it's actually not yet. There's actually only a finite amount of things.
I understand what you're saying. I'm just saying that I'm trying to be sensitive to the, like, I've received criticism in the past, and I'm explaining why people will have a problem with us talking about it in such a way where it sounds like we're trivializing it.
No,
I'm saying
by no means are we trivializing
the impact that it has on people. So for instance, it's easy for two guys to talk about Roe v. Wade because we're not affected.
Drag queens and anything like that.
Right.
And you're right, Roe v. Wade, like, it doesn't actually affect us because
not directly anyway.
Yeah. So here's my question though, because somebody actually brought that up about the Tennessee thing, which only affects drag or drag performers. My question is, other than the fact that you're taking money out of somebody's pocket, because drag queens make money doing that, like that's part of a job that they do. Other than that part, who are you harming by inhibiting where drag can happen? Other than that restriction,
it's hard to say, but
because it's not like drag performers are in drag 90% of the time, and nor is it like that's what they do, that's who they are, but that's more of a performance expression piece.
For me, that wouldn't even be a question because I'll answer your question, but I'm saying I wouldn't. It doesn't need to go that far for me because just the fact that you're trying to inhibit someone's freedom of expression and speech is already enough for me. It doesn't matter how much it hurts them.
I'm only posing this because we're talking about it.
Yeah.
I'm not posing it because I agree with the law. I'm not saying I agree with any of that. I think people should be able to dress whatever way they want, as long as it hurts.
There's a lot of different ways that it could hurt them, but it'd be hard to quantify it because it depends on the person. But I'm sure that it may negatively impact them in some ways, maybe mental health. Like if they may feel like they're threatened, they may feel under attack. If people are passing laws restricting what they can and can't do. I know how you are.
Yeah.
How would you feel if
please
the state, just Massachusetts state legislature passed a law that restricted where autistic people can go, or said, "Hey, if you're autistic, you can't perform in public parks."
I've got to actually make the argument. Being autistic is a genetic thing. It's a human genetic thing. Doing drag is a choice.
Right, but it's the point of they're telling you what you can and can't do.
But telling somebody what they can and cannot do behaviorally, restricting...
But you can see how it might affect them mentally if I'm somebody who's...
So like if tomorrow Massachusetts said no more theater performances whatsoever, okay? And we both enjoy doing theater. We both enjoy doing plays. If tomorrow they said no more doing even more specifically, if tomorrow they said no more improv performances ever in Massachusetts, it's illegal. It might influence somebody the wrong way. It might be grooming or some bullshit. I don't know what the fuck the argument would be. But if they said no more improv performances, would that suck for me? Yes. Yes, it would suck for me. But does it ruin my existence? No. Even though comedy is very much a part of who I am, being able to express that with other people is very much something that makes me feel good and makes me feel whole and satisfied as a person. But is it going to destroy my entire life? No. Because I'll do it in private places, right? If we can't do it even in private places, now we're getting to a point of like, well, what the fuck are you doing?
So,
but hold on. I do also want to make sure I'm being very clear about my stance. I am not talking in the direction that I'm talking because I agree with Tennessee or any type of restriction on drag. I do not agree with it whatsoever. Yes, I view it as a performance expression kind of activity or behavior.
So I'm so glad that you're the one who's going to get canceled for this episode and not me.
And you're on the podcast with me. So I'm not saying that at all. And the implication that it has on the LGBTQ community, I do have a stake in that because I am part of that community. So I do absolutely believe that they're starting with drag and there is definitely a directionality that they're leaning in, especially with the anti-trans stuff. Like you're leaning in a direction where you're literally starting to tell an entire group of people, the LGBT community, you're trying to tell us where we can exist and
I was saying there
exist. And I don't agree with that at all.
one thing I didn't mention before, which I should probably clarify now, which people might hear the previous part, not hear this part.
Yeah.
But when I was talking about, like people being polarized and the tribalism and all that, that doesn't mean that the far left and the far right or the right and the left are always equal, or that I'm equating the two. I'm not, because sometimes one like group of people or one political group may have like a larger negative impact on society or on people than the other. So I think like there are lots of things that conservatives are doing right now that are negatively impacting people more so than what people on the left are doing. But that doesn't mean that the people who are ideologically left-leaning and absorbed in this leftist ideology aren't also negatively contributing to society.
Yes.
It's not, but they're not always equal. Like, so Republicans, we've gone through cycles, like political cycles in the past where it's like, you remember the Christian conservatives of like the 90s, and I think they had a very negative impact on society at the time with like trying to censor music and trying like some of that stuff. And then you saw like periods of time where the left was kind of overreaching with their like some of left, like a left-leaning version of authoritarianism, you know, and trying to, but like there's a difference between that and then like taking people's rights away or trying to pass legislation that actually hurts people. But so I'm not saying that those two things are equal, which is another thing I've been accused of. Like if I play
calling the far left and far right equal,
yeah, or like if I'm playing devil's advocate or trying to understand the opinion of the other side, there's like they're saying in their mind, especially if they're an NT person, that I'm equating the two and saying that a conservative Republican who is trying to pass laws that are going to harm trans people is the same as like a left person who thinks that jokes are offensive. Like, no, those are not the same. That's not what I'm saying.
Not the same at all. I actually had a professor, and this was for a political American government. Sorry, not political, but it was American government class. I had a professor who described politics as a circular spectrum, and the far left and the far right were actually far closer in their ideologies than they ever want to agree with, or they would ever admit to, because they're so staunch and radicalized and zealot in their belief of the far left, far right.
Well, it's not just about the belief, it's the effect that the belief has.
Yes.
How does it play out?
And also how they believe it should be enacted. So he, by the way, called himself a leftist commie. I'm not going to say his name because A, I don't want him to be associated with the podcast, but also because, like, I don't want people asking him questions like, what are your former students? Anyway, but he always talked about how the far left and the far right, okay, always want the same thing to happen. They want laws, they want the government to step in and laws to be enacted to justify their belief.
Right.
To back up their belief. And he said, and that's dangerous in both sides, because instead of coming to an understanding of each other's point of view and using the government the way government is supposed to be.
As a tool instead of a hammer.
Right.
As a tool instead of a club.
Yeah.
Or a sword.
Good way to describe it. And I always kind of looked at that, especially because, like, I hear people constantly bash on one group or another, and I don't care if you're left or right. I hear people bashing on groups and saying that group, all of that group thinks this or that. And they're forgetting that group is made up of individuals, human individuals, and not everybody of one label and designation believes the exact same level of severity and or the exact same thing. Like, I'm a Christian, but I don't believe anybody who is LGBT is wrong, evil, bad, or should burn, or should be eradicated, or dead, or any of that. And I don't believe Christianity says that. Now, somebody might go, well, then you don't fucking know Christianity. And that's cool. That's your opinion. Great on you. I don't believe that it's...
Oh, that's a topic for another day, Nick. We can get into religion.
Oh, okay.
I think you and I have very different beliefs when it comes to religion.
Very different beliefs.
It's okay. We need to start wrapping it up.
What?
We need to...
Already?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's been... So we've been talking for a while now. Before we wrap up, I wanted to... So I've been I've been ranting a lot because this is something that I was passionate about, especially the whole, like, the tribalist thing where people, like, fixating in their camps. That's something that really bothers me because I hate to see people treat each other like shit. for no reason. Because a lot of times when people are jumping down each other's throats, they're just making a bunch of assumptions about the other person that they don't actually know. They just assume something. Say, oh, this guy looks like he likes to hunt and he has a pickup truck. Therefore, he must love Trump and he probably hates black people and all this stuff. They make all these assumptions about that.
That's what I was trying to talk about a little bit ago, of like,
You make all these assumptions based on small pieces of information,
very little,
which is something that humans do. That's the way our brains work.
categorized.
Yeah, we categorize and we make associations. That's how our brains work.
Yeah.
But it's not fair to do that to people that you don't know. And I hate seeing that all the time. It drives me fucking nuts. And I'll defend people on the left and I'll defend people on the right when I see other people doing to it. And then what happens as soon as you do that? Well, then you're just like the other person.
Yes, you're doing exactly to them what you
So then they're like, oh, well, you're a Trump-loving person who hates people of color too. Okay.
yeah.
Because I don't know, it irritates me. But
Apparently,
but
people are going to take
that's fine.
away.
Before we wrap up, though, what we didn't really talk about.
Yes.
Because I went into this whole rant and fervor. This episode hasn't been as funny and as lighthearted as normal because I don't really make a lot more jokes. I was being the passionate one this time, but we need to talk about how this affects our people because we didn't talk about that. So before we wrap up, we really need what do you think? I know, so we are protected under the ADA, I believe.
Yes, we are.
But
those who are officially diagnosed are protected under the American with Disabilities.
and I don't think I'm alone with a lot of the things that I expressed. I think a lot of other people like us feel the same way. And I've seen a lot of people in discussions on like autism subreddits talk about how they feel like the same way we feel when we're in social situations. They feel like that in a hyper way when it comes to politics.
Yes.
Because of the way that we think and the way our brains work. They find themselves in a lot of the same feelings that I am. Like they don't understand the religious fervor in which people attack each other.
Yes.
And the constant ostracization and the othering and the way that people treat each other. And people like us, when we get involved in it, we have a tendency of being demonized on whatever side that we're trying to understand. It's like, well, they're not even worth trying to understand.
Well, because we don't raise the pitchfork immediately.
Yeah. It's like, I don't want to bring out the torches and the pitchforks right away. I need to understand this a little better. And I mentioned it before, and I'll mention him again. One of my favorite guys I've ever seen on anything. There's a documentary about him, and I've also seen him on YouTube several times. Is Daryl Davis. I think he's still alive. I don't think he's passed away yet. He's an older gentleman now, but he's a black man who goes out of his way to become friends with people who are in the Klan, and then collects their hoods, which is like the coolest fucking thing I've ever heard. The guy, he actually he collected the hood of a leader of the Klan. He became friends with the leader of the Klan at one point, and the guy quit. Wow. Because they can't live with the cognitive dissonance.
Right.
It's like, well, on one hand, like white people are the best, and I hate black people, and then on the other hand, well, my best friend's black.
Yeah.
And then they're like, wait a minute, something doesn't add up. Because all of those stereotypes and all those things I think about those people, my friend's not like that.
Yeah.
And then they change. But it's amazing to see what he does. Right. And that's how I feel about politics.
Okay.
Is like, I want to understand.
Yeah.
And if somebody does have an extremist viewpoint or they're in a dark place, I'd rather try to understand them and empathize with them a little bit and figure out how to de-radicalize them than just write them off. Right. And that's how you end up with more school shootings.
Yes, crazy people. We radicalize people more, yeah.
Because we just write them off as crazy incels who deserve to be virgins for life.
We treat people like crap. And we treat somebody like crap, they're going to rebel.
Yeah.
I used to use the expression, you can only kick a puppy in the corner so often until they're bite you. That's a horrible expression, I get it. But the whole idea is backing something into a corner or treating it like crap for so long before it attacks.
Is there anything you can think of politically right now related to autism? Because I just went on a whole autistic rant this entire episode about politics.
But you deserve to. I usually draw rants about things. Well, one thing I will say is LGBT actually exists very predominantly in our population, especially on the Aspie side of it. There's a lot of instances of us, so it does affect us a great deal. And because we're so empathetic and because we're so loving of other people, we're so accepting, and we're one of, in my opinion, one of the only actually inclusive communities there is, because we accept just about everybody because we try to see it from their point of view. I think a lot of this stuff affects us a great deal.
Yeah.
Because if
There's a lot of people on the spectrum who are gay, lesbian, bi, trans,
queer, asexual,
there's a lot of
ally, all of that.
sexual diversity,
Yes.
gender diversity.
Yes, absolutely. And I think because of that, we are all very much affected by it, because we're also in a population that there's still argument about how we're allowed to exist, what we're allowed to do. Are we protected from being fired just because we are what we are?
And we're very close to living in a world where people will be able to genetically select how their babies are going to be. The technology already exists.
Oh my God.
And there's a future there, maybe in the next 5 to 10 years, where autistic people might not exist anymore.
That just means I need to have more children.
Yeah. I mean, because people, they can literally, it's a modern form of eugenics.
It is.
But the technology already exists to be able to select what your child is going to be like, and to favor certain things. And I don't know, it's crazy.
Since we're about to wrap up, I do want to make sure, because Steve got me a little paranoid here, I do want to make sure people understand that I actually do support my own community, whether it be autism or the LGBT community. I do support.
I was mostly joking. It's just that
You can't be paranoid.
well, it's because people have a hard time, even in context, when you explain things.
Yeah.
People still misread it, and a lot of times I think they misread things on purpose just because they want something to be angry about, which is, if we had more time, I would go into that, is the selective outrage, like people being mad at things while ignoring things that are much worse right in front of them,
Right.
which is kind of what I was talking about with the whole Republicans being angry about things that aren't important.
Yeah.
When I say not important, I mean like they're not a problem, like
Right.
they're mad
For the
about-
rest of us, it's not a problem, but they're making it a problem.
They're making a big issue.
Political theater of it, as you said.
Yeah.
So we do support people. We do support humans, and we do support humans' rights to.
Oh, I could do another 3 hours on
You
politics right now.
fucking-
We only scratched the surface. I only talked about tribalism. I didn't even go into some of my ideology and some of my principles.
Eventually.
But what we can wrap it up right now, and because this episode was so serious, in post-production, I'm going to add in a clip of Joe Biden talking about his hairy legs.
Why would you use that of all
Because it's funny to me. The clip where he says, I got hairy legs, I'm going to throw that in there.
What? Why don't you put a picture of Mitch McConnell in a turtle suit or something?
No, because I normally do a joke at the end of the...
Yeah, you do. You do.
I mean, I could do a clip where Trump says something stupid, but I just think that
do both. Do both just to be equal on both sides. Just to be equal on both sides.
Joe Biden, the way that he says things is really funny to me sometimes.
I'm again going to watch the episode of Smart List that has President Joe Biden.
Oh, he can actually
have really smart guy.
Yeah, he can have but sometimes he just goes off on these weird stories where he talks things like, well, what is he talking about?
Right. If you watch that episode of Smart List, which, by the way, if y'all like podcasts and celebrities interviewing celebrities, Smart List is a great one. It's hosted by Jason Bateman, Sean Hayes, and Will Arnett. I'm a big fan of that podcast, and apparently I like to promote everything. But the one with President Biden, it's a really good episode.
Yeah.
Anyway, beyond that, though, thank you very much, everybody, for listening to us. I'm Nick.
I'm Steve.
And please tune in next week to the next episode to it. If you've been listening to our podcast this whole time, thank you very much. Please tell your friends. We need more people to watch it. We want to get the word out there as much as possible. Thank you so much.